Joining us now to talk about that and some other goings-on in Washington and dealing with Congress, where she is chief congressional correspondent at the Washington Examiner, Susan Ferrechio. Hey, Susan.
Hey, Steve. Thanks for having me.
No, thank you for coming on. Never a dull moment, huh?
No, lots going on up here today. They just voted to pass this bill in the Senate. They didn't get their 70 votes. They got 68.
That's what I was going to ask you about. Yeah, because Schumer and the Democrats who were on the Gang of Eight were really hoping for 70 to send some kind of message.
Right. And they got 68, so it was I think there was a bit of a letdown. They're not really acknowledging it that way, but after saying 70, 70, 70 for all these weeks, and then they get 68. And combined with that, you're hearing repeatedly from House leaders, this has been something they've talked about here and there over the past few weeks, saying that they're not going to take the Senate bill up in its current form. I don't think the Senate really expects that. I think, though, they feel like by sending a bill over with 68 votes, it will pressure the House to put something together that's similar. And now that's the big question mark. What will the House put together? Will it have a pathway to citizenship? I think the real question here is, what's the trigger going to be? I do believe if there's anything that's going to move out of the House that is even something the Senate would consider, because Senate is run by Democrats and House is run by Republicans, I think the House bill is going to boil down to what the trigger is. And by trigger, I mean, what's the requirement for legalization? The Democrats really resist the idea of any kind of legislation where you would have to have a level of border security before legalization can happen. What they want is legalization and a pathway to citizenship or a green card, while we'll say we're going to do these things, and then these things can happen at their own pace. I think what Republicans want is no legalization at all until we have a certain level of border security affirmed. In other words, let's stop 1986 from happening all over again, where you allowed lots of citizenship to happen, and then the borders remained open, and then we developed the problem we have now. That's what's going to happen in the House. The question is, will Democrats agree to it in exchange for, again, at the very least, legalization? A lot of Republicans are saying, what's interesting to me is they're saying no path to citizenship. I think they're saying we'll do guest worker, we'll expand that. So I think at best you're going to get a House bill with a really stringent trigger that Democrats are going to hate. I don't think you can get anything more than that. That's at the most. And at the very least, you're going to get something that doesn't even have legalization or pathway to citizenship. You're going to get something that has people coming over. They'll allow the guest worker program to be created, visas, H-1B visas, and low-skilled, high-skilled visas.
Well,
That's happening in the House.
No, I agree. I mean, I've talked to several House members over the past few days and past few weeks, and a couple today, and they all say DOA for the Senate bill. It's not going to even be taken up. And they all talk about, securing our border, and they all talk about how they believe John Boehner will stick to the Hastert rule that he says he will stick to. I think he reiterated that. Do you see any indication that that Hastert will bend on that? And for those who don't know, that means that a majority of the Republican caucus in the House would have to support a bill before it's brought to the floor. Do you see him going the other way on that?
In other words, will he bring a bill to the floor and let 20 Republicans vote for it and let Democrats pass it?
Right.
No, I don't think so. He said it a bunch of times now. Sometimes you got to kind of read between the lines what the leadership says over in the House or in the Senate, for that matter. And I'm getting the sense that that is actually something they're going to stick to. There's been various threats. I know some of the conservatives yesterday were saying if he does this, if he moves the pathway to citizenship to the floor, if he moves something like the Senate bill to the floor that's not going to pass with a majority, as you say, that they're going to try to remove him as Speaker. He's also getting a lot of pressure, though. I mean, speakers, there's a lot of Republicans, a lot of people in the conservative world who are behind, as you know, the pathway to citizenship and legalization for reasons that have to do with, business world wants cheaper labor. They put a lot of money into trying to get this thing passed. So people are being pressured big time and at the Republican leadership level in the House. That's why this thing is a little bit unpredictable at this point. Okay, so what could end up happening is they end up passing these smaller bills that he does not put the House Gang of Seven bill on the floor, which is going to look a lot more like the Senate bill.
Right.
And he's not going to put that down. He's going to be smaller bills, and by the smaller bills, I mean E-Verify, border security, exit entry stuff that secures when people come and go and who's overstaying their visas, maybe guest worker, maybe high school visa.
But whatever he does, Susan, and whatever the House might pass, I mean, do you see Harry Reid then taking the, basically this issue piecemeal and bringing bill by bill before the Senate to pass it, and basically coalescing to the House way, or just saying, forget it, they're not doing it, and we're ignoring these bills, and they didn't want to do it, and put the blame on them?
Oh, he'll ignore those bills, but the question is whether they can bundle those bills together and bring them separately to conference. Now, big question that everybody's asking. A lot of people who oppose this bill don't want the Speaker to go to conference because they think if he agrees to go to conference, because that's a whole other step here, then that's when you could be adding in the pathway to citizenship and the legalization and the weak border security. The border security that they believe is not strong enough. Some people think it is very strong. So a lot of people who are opposed to the bill don't want conference to even happen. That's a big question mark in my head, whether that will happen. Because if he does go to conference and they that means Republicans have to agree to something. And if they do agree to anything, you can almost bet it'll have the pathway to citizenship in there. And then what happens? Does the Speaker bring that to the floor? This thing could stall pre-conference thinking at this point, just because you don't get any sense in the House that they can move it. I mean, I think what the Speaker said today was really interesting. He talked about today and yesterday. He was saying actually doesn't see any way to move the bill, and I think he's a practical speaker. He sits there and he just looks at the facts. And if he's always been somebody who said, let his conference work its will, and if he feels like they don't want this bill and there's enough of a feeling against it, I would find it really tough to envision him moving something that a majority in his conference opposed at this point on such a big deal. It would be a monumental move against his conference. So things look dim in my view because of the big canyon size difference between what the House is thinking of doing, run by Republicans, and what the Democrats in the Senate want. And when you have a gap that wide, it's tough to see how we get unity to get a bill out of Congress.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. We're talking to Susan Ferrechio, Chief Congressional Correspondent, Washington Examiner, here on the Steve Malzberg Show. Let's talk about the IRS. The left has basically, certainly the media on the left has said that the scandal, the quote-unquote scandal, as Chuck Todd is now referring to it as, and Rachel Maddow said, is this not over? It's over. It's over. So it's over because allegedly, the IRS also targeted groups with progressive in the name, and so it was an equal opportunity abuse of power, and everybody was treated the same, and end of story. But of course, the Inspector General is saying now today that no, that was not the case. That about 30% of the people, the groups may have had progressive in their name, but they weren't given the same scrutiny. They might have been red flagged and searched for, but they were not asked the intrusive questions. They were not given the same hassles, which is why we haven't had really any progressive groups come up and say, hey, they did it to me too. They did it to me too. It's been all groups on the right. So where do we stand with this, as far as you know?
Well, that's exactly right, what you were saying. And I've been hearing this all along. That's why I was surprised to see this sudden shift in Democrats all of a sudden saying, look, there's new evidence here. The Inspector General always said that while some of the progressive groups may have been pulled aside, or at least people on the Oversight Committee staff were saying, well, they have been pulled aside. They were, according to testimony provided privately between congressional investigators and some of the staff at the IRS, they said, well, we did flag progressive groups, We did. They admitted it. And then the investigator said, well, what did you do with them? I said, we just put them back into the general pile. So they didn't go in the pile where the Bolo Tea Party people went. Those guys went in through the ringer there, but the progressive groups were kind of put back in. So there was evidence all along that they may have pulled these guys out, but the fact is who got their tax-exempt status and who didn't. 100% of the Tea Party groups pulled out, got the big scrutiny, whereas 30% of the Tea Party groups did. So
you mean 30% of the progressive groups? Yeah.
Excuse me. Yeah, I'd say. So that's a pretty big difference. I know just from talking to IRS, former top IRS people, I said they always made a point when they do that kind of scrutiny on any group for any reason that they make sure it's even. Because they don't want it to look political, because that would reflect poorly on the president. The point of them, So there's always, they're supposed to be really careful to make sure that you're not doing this anything other than 50-50. You want to make it look. Anyway, so it's very clear here that the Tea Party was getting the additional scrutiny. Nonetheless, Democrats today requested that they want the Inspector General, George, to come back and talk to them about this, because they feel like he wasn't being truthful despite the letter he has sent. I'm not sure if that's going to happen, because they don't run the committees. They can have their own committee.
Why would the Inspector General lie?
Well, there was a question about whether that Chairman Issa, the House Oversight, asked him to narrow his report to groups about the Tea Party. But that can be interpreted a number of ways. Is that just because the Tea Party groups were the only ones given the additional scrutiny?
Right.
Yeah, so that's pretty interesting, I think. And it's not clear right now. I think it's confusing to the public, I'm sure. It was today, too, because I'm reading this letter, watching this hearing, I'm like, wait a minute.
I know.
They're all out of sorts on it. It's confusing to the public, and you hear people, like Rachel Maddow or whoever saying, is this thing, Elijah Cummings on House Oversight saying this thing is a wrap. Why?
Yeah, he said it was over 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know where all these hearings are going to lead, or if they're going to continue. I hope they do. Now we got Benghazi. Of course, I know that Darrell Issa is not giving up on that, and the others aren't giving up on it. We have a diary entry today revealed by the website SoftRep.com, which is run by a group of former U.S. Special Ops personnel, that says Ambassador Stevens, in his final entry, warned of security threats. So this, this looks just worse and worse and worse all the time.
I know. I don't think they're going to drop Benghazi. I don't see any sign of that. And I think that they're, they've got requests in to get information that they haven't gotten yet. So I think that there was just a subpoena sent out this week having to do with trying to get information from the State Department folks who were behind the early communications following Benghazi, just to find out why what they were communicating in emails was so much different to what UN Ambassador Susan Rice said on the Sunday talk show. They're still trying to get to the bottom of it here. I don't think you'll see the end of that. Now, keep your eye out tomorrow. There'll be, I believe, a committee hearing where the topic will be the IRS former head of the tax-exempt groups. They'll be talking about her use of the Fifth Amendment to refuse to testify last month. I think the discussion is going to be whether or not that was legal, given the fact that she read an opening statement.
Oh, okay. Now, what kind of hearing is this going to be, did you say?
They're going to be discussing her, whether or not...
Yeah, whether or not her taking the Fifth, actually, if she blew it because she had made an opening statement. All right, great. We'll watch for that tomorrow. Susan, as always, great talking to you. And if we don't hit you next week, which I think we will,